Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gary Todd, Director of Security for PNM Resources, and a couple things real quick as a precursor to this. I'll never be accused of being a highly paid motivational speaker or a lowly paid motivational speaker, but if it's something I'm interested in, I can get my point across. The other thing is, so I've been in security coming up on 25 years now, been with PNMR for 15 years in various aspects of security. And to include today, the number of vendor presentations that I've participated in for any vendor partner is one, this one. I don't do these, but this platform and this relationship that we've had for a number of years is important enough to me that I was happy to make an exception and do this. So a little bit about our company. We are headquartered in New Mexico. We are a publicly traded electric utility, operated as PNM in New Mexico, Texas, New Mexico Power in Texas. The numbers that I'll show you in a minute, in contrast to the numbers you saw just a moment ago, much, much smaller. Our footprint is nothing like a lot of the companies you'll hear from. But in contrast, the challenge that we have and all electric utilities have is the diversity of the type of infrastructure, type of locations that we deal with. That's what makes it very, very challenging to have effective access control. As Ruby mentioned earlier, having assurance at one door but other doors open is false security. And so for an electric utility, we have our IT and personnel locations, headquarters, payment offices, administrative offices, just like any other company. But then we have OT or industrial control facilities that are very, very diverse. We have everything from generation to transmission and distribution substations, and now solar and wind facilities. And the other thing that makes our environment very, very challenging is that electric utilities depend to a significant degree on contract labor. We have a large number of contractors that are constantly moving in and out of our organization doing specific projects. And that's only going to continue accelerating in future years as we transition our generation portfolio to more and more renewables from traditional coal and natural gas generation facilities. And a lot of the transmission and distribution infrastructure is going to change along with that. So there's a lot of contractors, and we have some requirements for assurance and compliance around contractors that are very unique to the electric utility industry. So the advantage that we've found over the years, and as he mentioned, we've been a client since 2014. And at the time, we had a very interesting driver. We had to be CIP compliant, which stands for Critical Infrastructure Protection. For those that aren't familiar with critical infrastructure protection requirements, you're missing a lot of fun. And so the SIP requirements, there are very, very specific requirements that there's no leeway. He mentioned 99.5%. In SIP world, you failed. If they can, the audit periods are 3-year audit periods. And if there are any instances of noncompliance that are identified in that 3-year period for all the myriad different requirements, you didn't pass. So to be able to do access control the old manual way on spreadsheets and any other way you can think of, I don't see how someone could prove compliant. You might be close. You might be able to arguably say you're compliant, but to be able to run the reports, to do the type of automated audits that are necessary to prove that compliance in a timely manner during an audit, it couldn't be done, in my opinion. So we had that driver, so the ROI was very easy for our organization. At a certain point, the SIP requirements have been through several different variations over the years, and increasingly bringing in more and more of our infrastructure. And at a certain point, it became pretty obvious that we needed to have automated access control and all the things that would bring us. And so you've always heard that compliance doesn't equate to security, but in our environment, we found out once we implemented it, we made the decision to, instead of just implementing strictly for SIP requirements, we did it for the entire organization for all access control, so that there would never be any question of someone being in or out of bounds for compliance. What we found out is that it did help our security. And not only did it help our security, it changes the dynamic from the manual phone call, email process, the individual heroics that typically happen. I like the analogy, like eating vegetables. It's, compliance and access control. It's not something that people really enjoy doing, but to have that enforcement where it just becomes a matter of routine takes that hesitance out of it. It becomes a natural part of your business process after a period of time. So there's a lot of stuff on here. I'm not going to reread it all, but for us, the integration of Alert Guardian into Active Directory, PeopleSoft, Secure, Tripwire is what allows it to work for all parts of our organization and not just IT or certain parts of the organization. I've really gone over a lot of this. I want to hit something on the top left. He was a moment ago, he was talking about the ROI of reducing the level of manpower you might need. I don't know. I wouldn't say that has ever been really a driver for us, and I couldn't point to any reduction in ours. But what I will say is it's made our compliance job and ultimately our security, both physical access and electronic access, much more easy to do and easy to prove. The reports to be able to show who's had access to what facility, either electronic or physical, at a moment's notice, it's invaluable to us. The people that are doing access control in our organization day in and day out, it's not individual heroics anymore, and it's not something that they're putting off because they can put off. It's part of the business process, and it just works and it just happens. So I think that it makes the jobs of the people that are really responsible for access control, it makes the jobs different and better, in my opinion. I guess the one thing I'll call out on this slide, we talk a lot about role-based access, and role-based access is where you really get your efficiency in an organization. Role-based access is where when someone comes on, boom, you can provision their access. They're ready to work day one. And we're not 100%, and I don't know that we'll ever be 100% because there's always going to be some individual accesses that have to be provisioned for specific, unique people, depending on what kind of project they're working, particularly contractors. But the importance of having this platform in place and enforcing it on all employees, including contractors, makes it easy for us to enforce things that are really good for our security. And I'll give you an example. So and we've always had a requirement of reassessing all contractors' access every 90 days. Basically a detective control, so that with contractors that come in and out of our organization, if a lot of times the manager may or may not terminate that person's access, they still work for that vendor. And there may be still other people from that vendor that are working in our organization, and there's always that chance that that person's going to need to come back in and do more work for us. So there's kind of a hesitancy to eliminate access immediately in case they need to come back in and do work for us on a particular project. There's a process where we reaffirm the need for that person to have access every 90 days. Well, when that was being done manually, I couldn't say for sure whether that was really being done, but as a part of a workflow process, it's absolutely being done. And I know who's approved that person to continue having access to the organization. And I can't emphasize the flow and the number of contractors that are coming in and out. So it's a big help for us. Another thing that's very unique to the electric utility industry is that we have some facilities that are shared with other electric utilities. There are substations where there may be assets from our utility as well as other utilities that are interconnected to us. So we're able to
recording stopped.
Provide assurance that they also were reaffirming that those employees for that other utility still work for that utility and still require access to those locations. Becoming very, very important now with a lot of
recording in progress.
The substation attacks that were in the news at the end of last year and early this year in Pacific Northwest and some of the states on Northeast. Physical access has taken on a whole new importance for our industry and will continue to be important. So as I mentioned, the numbers, way smaller numbers than you saw a moment ago. But I would argue that even with this level of transactions, it would be virtually impossible to prove compliance and to prove the level of security that we need to provide. And, I kind of jokingly mentioned SIP at the beginning. There's a very important reason for the access control requirement for SIP. Of the 16 critical infrastructures that CISA identifies for the U.S., it always depicts energy in the middle, and that's not by accident, because the bad guys know that all they have to do is take out energy, and they've effectively taken out the other 15 critical infrastructures. So very, very important. This slide is just a number chart. The access terminations, you see down on the about 3/4 of the way down on the right, 1,100 or so. Small compared to some larger organizations, but compared to the number of employees that we have, that kind of gives you an idea of the number of changes and transactions that are taking place. And they're still facilitated by email. So it's still easy for people to be aware of and know they need to go in and do something, but it's not that haphazard, unstructured email and phone calls that we used to deal with back in the old days. So I think I can say with some assurance that if SIP was to discontinue today, it's not. We would still be on the system, and we would still see a huge benefit for our assurance and compliance.
Yeah, quick question. I'm with Mosaic, and we're kind of similar in sectors where we're we're facilities that manufacture fertilizer and all that kind of stuff. What do you do? How do you manage in it? We call them turnarounds. You guys call them outage. Is there any difference in the way you manage those?
Somewhat. There's a provision in the SIP regulation for a SIP exceptional circumstance. So under certain situations where there's an urgent, particularly if it's a safety issue, then exceptions can be made and people can be escorted by someone else with access that already has provisioned access previously. So there's ways to provide the access that's needed, even with some pretty rigorous regulation.
So Gary, thank you very much for sharing the story. So first of all, thank you for being our customer. So one of the things we want to share with you is that you talked about the substation shooting. So this is one of the hottest topics. Like it happened at, as you know, a number of places. So there's an event coming up just for utilities where this will be the topic that will be discussed, and we are invited thanks to great customers like you, where they're saying, okay, we need to know potential behavior analytics. This could be an ex-employee contractor who could be disgruntled for all of these things, how these can be mitigated. So this is about looking at all the video information, and then we have partners like SAP Intel is providing edge computing because they feel this is such a critical problem. How do we collaborate to solve those problems? We would love to share those details with you. And obviously, if you are interested to share your thoughts, just like you give us so much insight, help, we'd love to engage you in that. So thank you.
So with a planned outage as well, how you get an influx of contractors, when you have a turnaround, you have a planned outage and everybody writes names that they've never seen before and they wait to the last minute. Same thing. Do you just do an exception to the rule for a planned outage as well?
You better not. So the SIP exceptional circumstance is definitely not for planned outages. And so there are ways that you can onboard quite a few people in a very short period of time. Just because the approval process is automated and enforces a certain level and certain number of approvals based on our process, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to take a long time. As long as the communication is done in the organization in the right time, and sometimes even in a short turnaround if something comes up that's relatively unexpected. As long as people are aware and cooperating and everyone working together, you can put a lot of approvals through the correct process in a short period of time. So there was one other thing that Jasper keyed me on that I hadn't mentioned and definitely need to. So one of the most important SIP requirements that would be the hardest to enforce would be the requirement that training be retaken every year, and background checks, what we call PRAs, must be done at the beginning of access and every 7 years. So without an automated workflow process where there was an assurance and an automated disablement of access, if they don't end up taking that training after 3 or 4 reminders that they get from that automated process, then their access is automatically disabled. And that absolutely would not happen without an automated workflow process. So.
Yeah, and we have another question, Gary, at Zoom. How many employees are managed by IAM, and how many employees administer your IAM? How many employees?
So we have about a little bit under 1,600 full-time employees, And at any one time, several hundred contract that are administered under the same process, under the same requirements as the employees are. Obviously, the contractor flow in and out is much higher than employee changes. Employee changes. Electric utility industry, the longevity is probably much longer than I've seen in any other type of organization I've ever looked at. But contractors, there's a steady flow in and out. They're all managed the same, so it's only a few hundred at any one time, but the flow is probably I'd say 5 times what the employee transaction flow is.
How big is the team that's doing identity access?
We have 2 that do full-time access management, and they're amazing. I'll say that, but they have a good platform to work with. And then we have 2 or 3 others that do different aspects of access control for part of their job. So total, I'm going to say 3 total.